The market town of Witney in the Oxfordshire Cotswolds is famous for its 3 Bs: bread, blankets and beer. Since it's midsummer there and Jeannie likes to watch how much bread she eats, that left only 1 B: beer.
Here in Great Britain, it's practically a national pastime to head down to the pub for an ale or a pint. However, I'm not a big drinker, so instead of drinking my beer, I'm going to be the first person in the country to actually eat my beer. But first, a lesson on how it's made.
Already a centuries-old business, 22 years ago Wychwood Brewery was commissioned to make an ale specifically for the wedding of a landlord's daughter. Christened the legendary Hobgoblin, it went on to become the UK's 5th biggest bottled ale and a modern legend.
The equipment used in this brewery is from the 19th century, so that would be quite different to how beer is brewed in a modern brewery.
Here we use a system that was in place up until about the early 1900s. We use a copper, which we boil the beer in, and most breweries today would use stainless steel. But at that time, when beer was brewed, copper was the only thing that contained boiling water. We also use a double drop system here, which is probably the only one in the UK, and if it isn't the only one, it's definitely the oldest in use. So we drop beer. It's a way of adding air to the beer and kicking the yeast into action. So it's pretty unique.
Would you like to try some of my fine ale? It's nearly ready to go out to bottle. It's just cooling down. It might be a bit yeasty.
It actually tastes like a Coke float. You know, when you've got all the ice cream above your soda, but it is quite palatable. It's not very bitter, as I would have expected, and it's got quite a fruity flavour.
That's the hops.
Many of the labels they deliver to pubs across the Cotswolds take their inspiration and names from the myths and legends of nearby Wychwood Forest. Stories most appreciated by local ad man turned screenwriter, comic and award-winning food author Jim Jams Davies.
Hello!
Jeannie T!
I came bearing gifts. Mwah.
Fantastic. A beautiful girl with beer. We're going to make a risotto.
All right.
A nice Italian risotto.
Nice, a beer risotto.
Beer risotto. It's a rustic dish from northern Italy.
This is usually the cooking process that I'm best at, but I'm usually just putting popcorn into the pot.
Well, listen, we're going to start with onions, celery, and some carrots. That's the white and the red and the green of the Italian flag.
Yes.
Okay, the tricola. Tricola.
Tricola.
We're going to add some arborio rice. It's a nice round rice, which means the sides, they'll start to break down before the middle. And what will happen is we'll get this lovely, creamy risotto.
Somebody told me when you're making risotto, you've got to stir it in figure of 8.
Figure of 8 all the time. You carry on doing that. I'm going to get some liquid. And I know it's a great shame, guys, but what you have to remember is beer is cheaper than wine.
But how will the beer change the flavour of the risotto as opposed to if you use a wine?
Well, we're going to get some lovely malt flavours in there. We won't get any bitterness because we're using an ale which has got a very sweet malt in it in the first place.
Well, cooking risotto, it takes a long time. It's almost a full-time job.
Yeah.
But you've got a couple of jobs.
Screenwriting was my passion and is my passion. But the thing is, you tend to work like 3 months of the year and then you've got 9 months to do nothing.
That sounds like the most ideal job in the world, actually.
Well, it can get quite boring. So that's why I got into the cookery and food, because I love food and I love spending my time making food. I'm breaking a sweat here.
I'm glad you're finding it really hard watching me stir your risotto.
It's all in the beauty of watching you.
I think I'm getting a blister.
Here's the trick, Demerara sugar. The reason I'm adding that is just to remove some of the bitterness that we will get from the hop in the beer. Next up, Parmigiano.
Parmigiano. I'm a cheese addict. I can have cheese on everything and everything, so don't be shy.
This has got the highest calcium content of any cheese.
You're quite a cheese expert.
I became a cheese expert, but by default, my neighbour is the world cheese expert, and she was writing a book called The World Cheese Book, and she asked me to write about 10 countries. So I got to go to these countries and try their cheeses, and I found out, whilst I was eating lots of cheese, that in the countries that didn't make wine, the countries that made beer, the cheeses went really well with the beer. So essentially, that got me into the idea of matching cheeses with beer. And that, my sweets, is risotto alla birra.
Magnifique. Oh no, that's French.
In food, as in love, a good matchmaker is worth their weight in Parmesan, and Jim's contribution to the World Book of Cheese saw it voted Best Food Book 2010 by the Guild of Food Writers.
Risotto alla birra. It's fantastic.
Definitely worth the blister.
Yeah.
And I'll never look at beer in the same way again.
I hope you enjoyed your time in the Cotswolds. You can come anytime you want. Just make sure you bring the beer. Cheers.
On a fine English summer's day with this meal and setting, the world could truly be called a very civilized place.